Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this. It's 1518 in Strasbourg, and hundreds of people are just seized by this overwhelming urge to dance.
Hmm.
Not, a joyous celebration, but this relentless, days-long compulsion, people collapsing from sheer exhaustion.
Yeah, even heart attacks, strokes. Some reports even mention death. It sounds absolutely nightmarish.
It really does. But it actually happened, just one chilling example of what history calls these dancing diseases.
And what's fascinating right from the start is that this wasn't just some isolated medieval oddity.
Exactly.
Across different times, different places, we see these perplexing outbreaks of unusual physical symptoms spreading through whole communities.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've pulled together some really compelling stuff. We've got historical accounts from places like history.com, Wikipedia.
Mhm.
They give us the ground level details, starting with that bizarre scene in Strasbourg.
Right, the firsthand-ish accounts.
And then we're also looking at it through a public health lens, using an analysis from greener journals, which brings a more contemporary understanding to these historical mysteries.
Yeah, so if we connect the dots, our goal here is really to look beyond the simple labels, those knee-jerk explanations.
Mm-hmm.
We want to try and understand how societies and eventually medicine have tried to make sense of these really strange episodes. It's about peeling back the layers.
Uncovering maybe the psychological, social, even environmental factors linking these things across centuries.
Precisely. Get ready for some real head-scratching moments,
Yeah.
but in a good way, hopefully.
Okay, so let's dive straight into the deep end then with the 1518 dancing plague of Strasbourg. It's just such a vivid and unsettling story. What exactly unfolded there?
Well, the historical accounts paint a truly bizarre picture. It all apparently kicked off in July 1518. There was this woman, Frau Troffe.
Frau Troffe, right?
She just began to dance in the street,
Yeah.
and not like a little jig, but a full-blown, seemingly uncontrollable dance.
And it went on for days, incredibly, for days, and without any music playing initially.
Days, uninterrupted. That's almost superhuman in a terrifying way.
And it wasn't just her for long, was it?
No, not at all. Remarkably quickly, other people started joining in. Within about a week, there were dozens more doing the same thing.
Dozens.
Yeah, and within a month, the number had just ballooned. Estimates are around 400 people.
400 people dancing uncontrollably.
Yes, and these weren't happy dances. Eyewitness accounts describe people in spasms, convulsions, drenched in sweat.
Oh, wow.
Their feet were swollen, bleeding. They were crying out, clearly in distress.
That's just a horrific scene to imagine, and the records mention people actually dying.
Yes, some of the historical accounts do state that. People died from what sounds like just extreme physical exertion strokes, heart attacks, utter exhaustion. One account even suggests maybe as many as 15 deaths per day at the peak of this frenzy.
15 a day.
That's what one source claims. But it's important to say the exact number of fatalities, well, it's still debated by historians. Some point out that contemporary records from Strasbourg itself don't explicitly detail deaths from the dancing. So there's some controversy there.
Right. So the authorities at the time, faced with this, what did they make of it? Their initial response sounds, completely counterintuitive now.
It really was.
Yeah.
Initially, the local guilds and magistrates, they attributed the dancing to something called hot blood.
Hot blood.
Yeah. And their proposed cure was basically to encourage more dancing.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
They actually mandated that the afflicted should keep dancing day and night to somehow, sweat it out or expel this ailment.
They leaned into it.
They totally leaned into it. They even put up stages, hired musicians, brought in healthy dancers to kind of keep the momentum going, encourage the afflicted.
That sounds disastrous. Surely that didn't work.
Quite the opposite, it seems. Instead of calming things down, the reports suggest the frenzy just intensified.
Oh, dear.
So after this rather misguided approach failed,
Mm-hmm.
the authorities shifted gears completely. They moved towards religious explanations.
Ah, okay. That sounds more typical for the era, maybe.
Yes, they came to believe it was a curse set by St. Vitus.
Saint Vitus, who was known for...
He was a saint who was believed to punish sinners with exactly this kind of uncontrollable dancing, or chorea.
Okay, so out with the dance party idea, in with divine retribution. What did they do then?
Well, they swiftly banned all public dancing and music. That was step one.
Right.
Then, the people who were still afflicted, they were ordered to undertake this forced pilgrimage
Pilgrimage, where to?
to the shrine of St. Vitus up in the hills at Severn. And as part of this ritual, they had to wear specific red shoes.
Red
Yeah,
shoes.
red shoes sprinkled with holy water, marked with crosses. They carry small crosses too. The whole thing involved incense, Latin incantations, a very formal religious response.
It really sounds like they were just desperately grasping at any explanation, any solution they could think of.
It certainly seems that way. But eventually the dancing did stop, didn't it?
Yes, the historical accounts say that by September of that year, 1518, the outbreak began to subside.
And the explanation back then.
Well, the prevailing view at the time was that St. Vitus had finally been appeased by all these religious rituals. The remaining dancers were apparently taken to a mountaintop shrine to pray for absolution.
So, that's the story as it comes down to us from the historical records. But what do modern theories tell us? What might have really been going on in Strasbourg?
Ah, this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Moving beyond the contemporary explanations.
Exactly. One of the earlier modern theories proposed was ergot poisoning.
Ergot poisoning, what's that?
Ergot is a toxic mold. It can grow on damp rye, which was a staple food, and it's known to cause muscle spasms, convulsions, hallucinations even.
Okay, that makes a certain kind of logical sense, a physical cause for these very physical symptoms.
It does seem plausible, yeah, at first glance anyway. It could explain the spasms. However,
There's a but.
there's a but. This theory doesn't really fully account for the sustained nature of the dancing, like dancing for days on end. That level of endurance is hard to explain just with ergotism.
Right, the sheer stamina seems off. So what's the leading theory now?
The prevailing modern theory, well, it leans more towards stress-induced mass hysteria, sometimes called mass psychogenic illness.
Mass hysteria.
Okay.
That's a term we hear sometimes. But how can extreme stress actually make people dance uncontrollably, like physically dance?
That sounds strange, I know. But the theory suggests that the intense and prolonged stress of the time, we're talking serious stress,
Mhm.
famine, rampant disease like syphilis, plague was always a threat.
Political instability, too.
Huge political instability, yeah. And layered on top of that, deeply ingrained superstitions,
Yeah.
especially this pervasive fear of St. Vitus's curse. All this created an environment where people were highly susceptible to suggestion.
Like a psychological powder keg.
Exactly. And this immense psychological pressure within that specific cultural framework could have actually manifested physically. As Korea, this is involuntary, jerky, sort of dance-like movements. And the strong belief in the curse could have then amplified these physical symptoms and helped them spread through the community. It's really about how the brain, under extreme duress and shaped by culture, can influence the body so profoundly.
It's not just in their heads, then. It's a real physical response.
It's a genuine neurobiological response to overwhelming psychological pressure. The mind-body connection is incredibly powerful.
So the sheer power of belief and stress literally making people's bodies move in this bizarre way, that's a really powerful idea. And the sources mentioned this wasn't totally unique to Strasbourg.
That's right. There are documented reports of at least 7 other sort of similar outbreaks, these dancing plagues, in the same general region, mainly during the medieval period.
Which lends weight to the mass hysteria idea.
It does, yeah. It suggests that the specific socio-environmental conditions and these shared belief systems were probably crucial factors. And there's also the possibility maybe of the nocebo effect playing a part.
Nocebo, that's the opposite of placebo.
Exactly. Where simply believing something negative will happen or expecting illness can actually contribute to it occurring or spreading the physical symptoms in this case.
Okay, so Strasbourg 1518 is a really striking kind of primary example. But you mentioned the History.com article also details other mysterious mass illnesses. Let's touch on some of those. First up, the Salem witch trials. How do they fit in here?
Well, what's fascinating with Salem is you see a really clear connection between intense societal anxieties and the emergence of specific physical symptoms in a community.
Okay.
In Salem, you had these young girls experiencing fits, convulsions in 1692, 1693,
Right.
but it wasn't happening in a vacuum,
Right. What was the context?
There was extreme stress, huge social divisions, arguments about the minister, real fear of attacks by French and Native American allies during King William's War.
A dangerous time on the frontier.
Very. Plus, a recent smallpox epidemic had hit hard. And on top of that, the Little Ice Age was causing crop failures, hunger, inflation. It was a real pressure cooker.
So all these immense pressures and the physical symptoms, the fits, they become almost like a language of distress for that community.
Precisely. And the accusations of witchcraft then provided a cultural framework, an explanation people could grasp. And crucially, it provided scapegoats for these otherwise inexplicable physical and social ills.
Starting with marginalized people.
Exactly. Blame fell first on Tutuba, an enslaved woman, then spread to others seen as outsiders or threats to the very fragile social order.
It's chilling, isn't it, how deep social tensions can manifest physically and lead to such tragic outcomes. Okay, what about the writing tremor epidemic of 1892? That sounds much more specific.
Yeah, this one's interesting because it highlights how even seemingly well-intentioned changes can have unexpected negative physical consequences.
How so?
In schools in Germany and Switzerland, a bunch of schoolgirls started experiencing uncontrollable shaking in their hands, but specifically when they tried to write.
Only when writing.
Apparently so. And it was linked to new teaching methods that really pushed rigorous mental exercise. The philosophy was kind of like the mind is a muscle that needs constant, intense training.
So, just the sheer volume and intensity of the writing exercises became physically overwhelming, like RSI almost.
Exactly. The tedious, repetitive nature took a real physical toll. And some researchers even suggested maybe it could have been a subconscious way for the girls to avoid these really demanding, maybe even dreaded writing classes.
Oh, the physical manifestation of that mental and emotional strain again.
Quite possibly, yeah.
That's a very different kind of trigger than Strasbourg or Salem. Okay, then we jump forward to 1944, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. That sounds like something out of a, I don't know, a Pulp Fiction story.
It really does have that air about it, doesn't it? Peak World War II paranoia. And this small town, Mattoon, Illinois, gets gripped by reports of a mysterious figure, the Mad Gasser.
And he was supposedly doing what?
Spraying some kind of noxious gas on people. Reports mention temporary paralysis, a peculiar sweet smell. The first report came from a woman who felt sick, and her husband claimed he saw a shadowy stranger outside.
And then, as often happens, the news just took off.
Oh, absolutely. The local paper splashed it on the front page.
Oh.
Almost immediately, the town was flooded with similar reports, alleged sightings.
Panic spread.
Totally. It even made international news.
Mm.
Widespread fear, panic, even though the supposed gasser was never actually found or identified.
Wow. It really shows how fear and suggestion can just amplify a perceived threat, especially in anxious times like war.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on again. The Gene bug epidemic of 1962 sounds maybe similar, a trigger that wasn't quite the real trigger.
Yeah, on the surface, it seems straightforward. Workers at a textile mill started getting rashes, nausea, numbness.
And they blamed.
June bugs. They collectively decided it must be June bugs infesting the mill. The media jumped on it, called it the June bug plague. But when entomologists actually investigated, they found zero evidence of any unusual June bug infestation. No bugs to explain it.
So if not bugs, then what?
Well, they did psychological interviews with the workers and found interesting patterns. Most people reporting symptoms were on the same shift. Many were working tons of overtime.
Stress.
High stress, yeah. And maybe most tellingly, a lot of them only reported symptoms after the media started talking about the plague.
Ah, the power of suggestion again.
Exactly. The explanation shifted to workplace stress, maybe combined with the power of suggestion, amplified by all that media coverage.
It's this recurring theme, isn't it? Mind, body, external narratives all tangled up. Okay, the Tanganyika laughing epidemic, also 1962.
Yep.
That sounds almost comical, but I guess it wasn't.
No, the name is memorable, but the impact was serious. This was just after Tanzania gained independence from Britain.
A time of big change and probably stress.
For sure. And an outbreak of what was described as uncontrollable laughter started among schoolgirls. But it wasn't joyful laughter, more like nervous, hysterical laughter.
And it spread.
Oh, it spread incredibly rapidly, eventually affected over 1,000 people. Across multiple villages, they had to close schools for months.
1,000 people laughing uncontrollably. Were there other symptoms?
Yes. Alongside the laughter, people reported rashes, fainting spells, even respiratory problems. The widely accepted diagnosis, mass psychogenic illness again.
It's just amazing how diverse the symptoms can be. Dancing, fits, tremors, paralysis, rashes, laughter. But that underlying mechanism seems to connect them.
It really does seem to be a recurring thread.
And finally, the last one mentioned here is pretty unsettling. The monkey men in India, 2001, that sounds particularly bizarre.
Yeah, this was during a period of widespread power outages, an intense heat wave in Delhi. Just a very tense situation.
Okay.
And residents started reporting attacks by this mysterious creature described as part monkey, part man.
A monkey man, seriously?
That was the report. Victims, mostly men from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, had these unusual injuries, described as bite marks. Tragically, 2 people reportedly died falling while trying to flee in fear.
Oh my God. So what was the explanation there? Was there a creature?
Well, a medical report commissioned by the Delhi police,
Hmm.
it suggested the wounds were likely self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted.
That was their conclusion. And that the widespread hysteria about the monkey man was largely fueled by sensational media reports and just gossip spreading like wildfire.
So again, fear, suggestibility in a vulnerable group amplified by
Used
narratives.
to be the pattern, yes.
Wow. Okay, so these historical accounts, they really paint this fascinating, sometimes deeply unsettling picture of psychology, society, physical health all mixing together. Let's shift now to that public health perspective from greener journals. How do they analyze these dancing diseases and similar outbreaks?
Well, the public health angle really emphasizes seeing these things, both historical cases like 1518 and more contemporary psychosomatic outbreaks, as this complex interplay
An interplay of what?
of cultural factors, psychological vulnerabilities within a population, and potentially the neurological ways stress manifests. They really highlight how much societal stressors and deep cultural beliefs influence the emergence and spread of these outbreaks.
Right, the cultural context is key. They mention a modern example, dinga disease in Uganda.
Yes, dinga dinga involves people in certain Ugandan communities experiencing these involuntary body movements.
Like the dancing plague.
Similar in the sense of involuntary movement, but significantly, these movements are often interpreted locally through existing cultural beliefs, often attributed to social stress or spiritual factors.
So the local understanding is paramount.
Absolutely. And this contemporary example just underscores how critical it is for public health approaches to be culturally sensitive and multidisciplinary. You can't just impose a purely biomedical explanation if it clashes with how the community understands illness itself.
That makes total sense. You have to meet people where they are. Interestingly, the Greener Journals article also mentions the therapeutic potential of dance, which is such a striking contrast.
It really is, isn't it? From uncontrollable disease to therapy. There is a growing body of evidence showing dance can be a remarkably powerful intervention
For what kinds of things?
for improving motor function, balance, but also mental health in conditions like Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, even stroke rehabilitation.
So, the very thing that seemed like a terrifying symptom in 1518 is now being used to heal. That's quite a turnaround.
It's a remarkable shift. Studies show benefits like better cardiovascular health. It might help modulate the immune system, and it can significantly alleviate depression symptoms, especially in vulnerable groups.
Any specific examples?
Yeah, like ballroom dancing has been shown to improve fitness in people with chronic disorders. And specific dance therapy programs can really enhance quality of life for Parkinson's patients. There's even research suggesting dance might improve cognitive performance and potentially cause functional changes in brain regions related to motor planning, especially relevant for Parkinson's.
That's genuinely fascinating. Okay, so thinking about these historical outbreaks from a modern public health view, what are the main implications for how we should respond today or in the future?
Well, first off, epidemiologists are crucial right at the start, identifying sources, causes, using surveys, lab tests if relevant, contact tracing.
The detective work.
Exactly. But beyond the purely medical investigation, health education and community engagement are absolutely vital,
And that cultural sensitivity piece you mentioned.
paramount. As we saw with Dinga Dinga, communication has to be culturally sensitive to build trust and make interventions effective. Adapting messages to local customs, like has been done in some Ebola responses, can make a huge difference.
So, really understanding the community's beliefs isn't just nice, it's essential for success.
Non-negotiable, really, in these complex situations. And then treatment and containment need to be comprehensive.
Mm.
Medical responses, yes, antibiotics, antivirals, managing toxins if they're involved.
And a logistical thing.
Yeah, rapid response teams, accessible emergency care. But the big takeaway is building resilience in healthcare systems. That means fostering multidisciplinary expertise, not just medical, but psychological, sociocultural understanding too.
Makes sense. The Greener Journals article also talks about technology and innovation. How is that helping?
We're seeing big progress. Modern diagnostics, like genomic sequencing, can help identify genetic links to conditions that might involve unusual movements, like ADEM, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis.
Okay.
And artificial intelligence, AI, is getting better at analyzing huge data sets, potentially spotting unusual health patterns earlier, maybe signaling an outbreak sooner.
Early warning systems?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, just robust data sharing and global collaboration, WHO, CDC, organizations like that, it's crucial for early detection and coordinated responses, especially for threats that cross borders.
And treatments.
Continued innovation there too, often through public-private partnerships. The rapid COVID-19 vaccine development is a prime example of what's possible.
So tech offers powerful tools. But the article also points out ongoing challenges in managing these kinds of things. What are the main hurdles?
Well, one big one is stigma. Unfortunately, conditions involving chorea, like Huntington's or Sydenham's chorea, can still carry a lot of stigma.
How does that affect things?
Negative perceptions can really affect how people are treated, and crucially, whether they're willing to seek help or support. And looking back at 1518 again, we also see how societal beliefs and political instability can seriously hinder public health responses.
Right, if people don't trust authorities or if there's widespread misinformation.
Exactly. It makes effective intervention much, much harder.
It really highlights how the whole social and political climate matters hugely for public health.
Mhm.
Okay, so finally, based on all this analysis, what key recommendations does Greener Journals offer for public health practice?
They suggest several things. First, strengthening surveillance, maybe using things like mobile health apps, digital platforms for earlier detection, and community reporting.
Using tech for good.
Right. Second, fostering more international cooperation and data sharing
Mhm.
for those cross-border outbreaks, building more integrated global health systems.
Makes sense.
Third, keep prioritizing community engagement and education, promoting awareness, encouraging people to report unusual things proactively,
That cultural sensitivity again?
always. And finally, keep advancing interdisciplinary research. We still need to understand the causes better to develop more effective, culturally appropriate interventions.
So it's a really multi-pronged approach, a tech, community, global cooperation, and ongoing research. It's clear these dancing diseases, historically or more recently, are way more complex than they first appear.
Absolutely. This long history reveals this fascinating, sometimes deeply unsettling interplay of the psychological, the social, the cultural, maybe even environmental factors.
And it feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? In our world of instant information and maybe misinformation, where anxieties can spread so fast, understanding these past events gives us valuable insights for today. It really underscores how vital it is to consider the human element, the psychological and social sides in public health.
Which leads to a question for you, our listener, to maybe ponder.
Yeah.
In our modern age, with rapid info spread and maybe heightened anxieties, how susceptible might we be to new forms of mass psychogenic illness? And what role does understanding this past play in preparing us for whatever unexpected health challenges might come next? We really encourage you to maybe dig a bit deeper into some of these outbreaks we talked about and just keep exploring that fascinating, evolving connection between our minds and our bodies, our health.